Welcome to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid. A set of conversations about our government, our politics, and the kind of country we aspire to be. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath, on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Welcome to the Edwin Eisendrath Show on WCPT. As you can tell from my voice, I'm not Edwin. I'm filling in for him today, and my name is Jill Wine-Banks, former Watergate prosecutor and co-host of hashtag Sisters-in-Law and host of Just the Facts, which is on YouTube and as a podcast. Both are podcasts and on YouTube. So I hope you'll watch those as well. And before our first guest today, they've allowed me a few minutes to talk to you and share my anger about at least one serious event. Actually, there are three things, but I don't think I'm going to have time. I'm going to time myself and make sure I don't overdo it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the truly fake polls. A social experiment was undertaken to publish totally made up numbers that showed Karen Bass way ahead of her opponent in the primary. And I don't know if it's illegal, but it sure is improper. It could have affected the voting because people thought, well, she's a sure winner. I'm not going to bother voting. But anyway, that's one of the things on my mind. Another thing on my mind is DOD's newest war, not the one on Iran, the one on our constitutional rights. And they have changed the rules regarding Stars and Stripes, which is a military newspaper published daily to make sure our service members, particularly those overseas or on ships like the USS Lincoln, get facts, not propaganda. And so they were independent of the government, even though part of their funding comes from the government. They were given, under the Code of Federal Regulations, independence so that they could publish the truth. And now those rules have changed because the Secretary of Defense, who would like to be called the Secretary of War, and maybe since he's starting all these wars, he should be called the Secretary of War, he thought that there was too much woke in the news reporting. So that's one of the First Amendment violations I see. Another is that he is demanding that there be a new curriculum for schools on military bases that will teach Christianity and Western civilization, including that Islam is inherently more violent than Christianity. And there's also his attack on women officers, female officers, and officers of color, most of whom have been removed from promotion lists. So I'm outraged about all that. But I'm also outraged about accountability in this era. It's a news topic recently. It's something I've thought about often. And that's because the Nixon Foundation started something that J.D. Vance escalated, which is saying, well, Nixon really wasn't so bad. It was just that the deep state went after him, which I guess makes me the deep state, which I am not. Actually, they're saying, well, his conduct wasn't so bad and that it would have only been a few days' story if it happened today. Unfortunately, I actually agree with J.D. Vance on that. And I know you're surprised that I could agree with Vance on anything. But his claim today, in today's media environment and with a subservient Congress, it would barely be a 2-day story. Nothing would happen. So that part of his story is probably true, but I disagree vehemently about the consequences of Nixon's conduct and that of Trump and what it should be. The conduct deserves investigation and consequences for both men. We need accountability, and while it wasn't perfect in Watergate, it was more fulsome than now. So I wanted to focus on some of the similarities and differences between Watergate and now and why they change the accountability for conduct. The differences have enhanced the possibility of accountability then and made it nearly impossible now. In Watergate era, there was bipartisanship. Compromise was considered to be a positive. Getting partway to your goal was viewed as better than getting nothing. And One compromise that maybe people don't know about is that Leon Jaworski, who became the special prosecutor after Cox was fired in the Saturday Night Massacre, said we could not indict the sitting president, even though I personally think that there's nothing illegal or unconstitutional about doing so. But he was adamant about that. But he did agree that when we indicted the others, we could name Nixon an unindicted co-conspirator to allow us to introduce the tapes into evidence against his co-conspirators. And he allowed us to ask the court to let us give our evidence to the House Judiciary Committee, which was undergoing impeachment investigation. And that evidence became the basis for 3 articles of impeachment. It let them act quickly rather than having to regather the same evidence, reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So that was one compromise. And as a result of our being able to share evidence, it led eventually to the 3 top congressional Republicans, the minority leader of the House, the minority leader of the Senate, and their former presidential candidate, Senator Barry Goldwater, going to the White House to tell Nixon that they had seen the tapes, they had heard the tape, and that he would be convicted if he didn't resign. That was a time when Congress was bipartisan, and that led to accountability. But another factor is that we only had 3 major networks, and they all had the same facts. There was no social media, there was no Fox News. When you have the same facts, everybody understands the facts. So that is what led to the acceptance of them and to the threat that he would be convicted. And the crimes proved were, during Watergate, obstruction of justice through perjury and hush money. But there was no risk that democracy was going to end, that the rule of law was over, that the Department of Justice was going to become his personal, that is Nixon's personal avenger. I didn't feel back then that any of that was going to happen and that there would be and was accountability. The underlying crimes today are so much more voluminous and so much more serious. Back then, when we said the cover-up is worse than the crime, that was true. The crime underlying the Watergate case was a break-in at the DNC, which was a silly, dirty trick that led to nothing. It was unsuccessful. It was nothing, and they were caught in the act. But the crimes now are much more serious than that. There is a cover-up as well, and that's bad. I mean, certainly we can look at the Epstein files and say bad cover-up. But when you look at the events of January 6th, the killings on the high sea and international waters, which is a clear war crime, when you look at the Epstein cover-up, when you look at U.S. citizens and immigrants being shot and killed by ICE agents who are not held accountable, by nobody blinking an eye when the president accepts a gift of a plane from Qatar, in violation of the Emoluments Clause. And then we, the taxpayers, are paying to update it to make it safe to use. And then he's going to take it with him personally. If you look at his charging $100,000 a month for early access to what he calls market-moving posts, I think those are much more serious crimes than the underlying Watergate crime. And so we need to move beyond the cover-up is worse than the crime. When we see people clinging to the wreckage of a ship that the Navy has destroyed and then killing those people, that's way, way worse. But I think when we look at another similarity, one of Trump's own people, a very short-lived communications director, he was there for just days, Anthony Scaramucci, hope you all remember him, said, "The fish stinks from the head down." And that was true of Watergate, where Nixon and all of his people believed that they would never be accountable, that the ends justified the means, and that they could get away with anything. Certainly the same is true now. but even more so because now Congress has totally abdicated its responsibilities. Congress, you must get your act together. You have the power of war. You have the power of the purse. What are you doing? You haven't even voted to say guilty in the impeachments. And the thing you had to say was not an impeachable offense, which you said publicly, but when the vote came, you had to say not guilty when you knew the evidence was there and he was guilty. So I'd like to end this on a hopeful note, but because I fear so much of what's going on now, I can't. Instead, I want to encourage you all to pursue the facts, seek justice, support the rule of law and bipartisan compromise, and vote, and go out there and get others to vote. I feel today like we're in 1939 in Germany, and if we don't start doing that now, if we don't stand up for the rule of law now, when they come for us, there'll be no one left. So please make sure you vote and get others to vote. Go, if you're in Illinois, campaign in Wisconsin, where it's going to really matter. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
I am so happy to have Lynn Sweet with us right now. She has been with the Chicago Sun-Times, if my numbers are correct, for 50 years. And she rose from being just a reporter to being the DC bureau chief. And she is now a special assignment reporter, and she's on a very special assignment. But she's covered President Obama since about 1999, and she has been critical of him. So I want to talk to her about that before we talk about her very special assignment. First, Lynn, I know when you first met him, he actually came into your office. So tell me about that.
So I would say I have always provided realistic coverage of President Obama, even when he was coming up, Jill, meaning I treated him just like every other Chicago reporter does to a political figure, and that is give realistic coverage. You look at the campaign finances, you look at what they say as opposed to what they do. Now, put that thought there for a moment. So I met Barack Obama when he was still a state senator running for then Illinois House of Representatives member Bobby Rush in the first congressional district. So he came to me, and the first thing he did was brandish a book that was a memoir that I had no idea he had written, or whatever it was, his story, I didn't know. This was in the days before the internet, where, of course, I would research anyone who comes in for a meeting, any elected official, and then I probably would have seen the book. I would have realized what the memoir is about, but I had no idea of his Kansas mother and Kenyan father, and I just was instead of asking the questions like, "What's this memoir about?" I kind of jumped into the questions about why you're running, what are you doing, what do you think of Bobby's record, and I didn't give the book the importance, of course, I should have had, and it's instructive to me and to anyone who is in the business of journalism or just life. If someone hands you a big, thick memoir when they meet you, stop, look, and listen, and even thumb through it to see what it's about, because I didn't, should have. But the meeting then, however, was about his running for office. And he was trying to figure out Washington, get some local press. Didn't especially strike me at the time as somebody in a position to beat Bobby Rush in a Democratic primary. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't think he had appeal, but knowing how entrenched Bobby Rush was in that district, serving that area as an alderman and then as a member of Congress, I just thought when Obama laid out how he was going to do his campaign, that it wouldn't work. Just my political assessment. So I've covered dozens and dozens of Illinois campaigns. local, state, federal. And I thought this one, is a longer shot. And I do remember I went to some events. I think I went to something, maybe it was the Kenwood High School. And I thought now everybody in the world thinks Obama is one of the greatest orators of all time. But I went to some event, and even if I have the venue wrong, Obama did well, but didn't leave me with the impression that I was speaking to somebody who would be president someday. And so that's just kind of my setup for getting to know him and that campaign. And then a few years later, of course, he ran for Senate in a much different campaign, a much improved candidate. He beat a crowded Democratic primary field. And he won that primary by a majority, not just a plurality. He was often running because shortly after winning that March primary, he gave that big speech in Boston in 2004. He already was putting himself on the path to the presidency before he even won his Senate seat.
So like you, I actually met him when he was in the Senate. A friend of mine was married to a senator, and I met him at a private event. And I, too, was not especially impressed by his retail political skills at the time. But boy, his oratorical skills have certainly soared, his policy skills. And I know you recently were at the Obama Center, and I was almost moved to tears for two reasons. One, I was so inspired by what I saw and by the emphasis on imagine your impact and how much it was about his working with people and how much we, the people, have power. But then I was so depressed because it was all about his accomplishments and what we've lost and where we are now. What was your impression of the center? And would you encourage people, as I would, go and see the outside, walk the campus, even now before you can get tickets to get in? And if you get there early enough, you can get tickets to go to the top of the museum. You'll only get to see the view and be inspired by that. But it's worth it. It is such a great campus. And I think they've thought about every little detail so that I am sure that even if you get tickets next winter, they will have thought of ways to make it beautiful for you to walk the campus even then. But it's worth going there now, don't you think?
Yes, and I know a lot of our listeners are within probably 30, 40 miles of Hyde Park in Chicago. And yeah, go now when the weather is nice. The campus placement, it was controversial. I wrote a ton of stories. It was on landmarked public land. It was a park district land, and there are lots of lawsuits. But in my I understand what happens when life goes on, and that battle obviously was lost. So you should go because the architecture is noteworthy. There's this big tower, and my thought, whatever my private thoughts are in the tower, I realize when I see it, they're still evolving. Hyde Park is a community where there are a lot of towers on churches and University of Chicago buildings. And this is the Tower of Towers. And it's most interesting at night, but there's more to the campus that spreads over 19.3 acres. And it is landscaped. It connects to the Museum of Science and Industry. And it is open. The plaza is kind of cool just to hang out. People might be just using it as a meeting place, and there's a restaurant inside. And then there is a beautiful branch of the Chicago Public Library done by, in part at least, by the Obama's private interior decorator. So it is the nicest public, out of all the 82 public libraries in the system, or maybe it's 88. But of all of them, this is beautiful. And I know it is getting a lot of traffic because if you don't have a ticket for the museum, it's a place you could go and see. So, it isn't that big.
Right. And you can see the gym, which is, the basketball court. Of course, you would expect a basketball court in anything that the President Obama had something to do with. It's really an amazing campus. The gardens are beautiful. The walkways are beautiful. The views are beautiful. And the symbolism of the hands coming together to hold the tower
Okay,
together.
that supposedly is, I don't see it, but that's what the architect said, because we could
Right.
look at a lot of, if bless you if you think that's what it is. Also, if you have kids, the playground is one of the
Yes.
coolest playground for children I have ever seen. That alone is worth it. And the thing about also about the campus is it's all rentable. So if you have an event coming, you could rent out the floor in the museum tower that has the Obama's private offices in there. That's for rent. The venue at the gym is being used. You see clips. I see clips in my social feeds all the time. We're having our meeting, our gala, at the Obama Center. And certainly the WNBA used it for a practice facility before their big game recently in Chicago. So it's also just a new addition to the scene. So if you have your big event come up, I have no idea what the price is or what the catering rules are, but it's available for rent.
Excellent. And let's before we run out of time, let's talk
No.
about the special assignment that you are now
Okay.
on. It's a pretty unique story, and it could remind some people of Where's Waldo, but I did a little research and I found two TV shows that it might be like, and I don't know if you've heard of them. One is called The Finder, and the premise of it's on Fox comedy drama. It's a spinoff of Bones, and it's about an eccentric Iraq war veteran who suffered a traumatic brain injury that left him with a unique gift, an obsessive ability to see patterns and find anything or anyone that is lost. He works out of a bar in the Florida Keys, and he's a locator for hire. So he goes to find military memorabilia, lost guitars, stolen art, and other unique physical objects. And then there's another one on Discovery called Lost and Found, which follows antique and memorabilia experts who use detective skills to track down long lost, much loved family heirlooms.
Oh.
So I thought, okay, so that's what your journey reminds me of.
Okay, so
Tell me about it.
let me tell people what we're talking about. And
Yes.
I wrote down the names of these shows. So I am looking for Obama's tan suit, the one he wore at that famous August 28th, 2014 press conference. So we learned at a press preview for the Obama Center. Somebody asked Mike Stratmanis, one of the executives at the foundation, what do you wish was in the museum that's not here? And he said the
Let's
tan
stop for a
suit.
second, Lynn, because Lynn, let's stop for a second because just to make sure everybody remembers the big drama about him President Obama wearing
good point.
a tan suit. So
So the reason this
there
is
was
the
a big
tan
drama,
suit that lives in history, is because Obama always wore dark suits, charcoal or blue dark suits. So he comes to this press conference in a tan suit, and the world explodes. It was a press conference that it was a press conference in the briefing room, not a formal one in the East Room. And it was decided, as far as my research shows, kind of that day, he came to work wearing a tan suit. And so the story wasn't about his views on ISIS, Iraq, the threats even back then to Ukraine. It was about the president wore a tan suit. Now, this was picked up almost mainly and only on right-wing media critical of Obama for anything he did. And former Rep. Peter King, a Republican from New York, said he looked like he was on his way to a party in the Hamptons. Anyway, so this suit is frozen in time as an episode of Obama's tenure in the White House. And so that's what led. And every few years, there's a resurrection of it, or when Kamala Harris spoke at the convention and she wrote, she wore a tan suit, that became a thing. But now you have the museum, and they have artifacts from the presidency. So when Stratmanis was asked, what do you wish was here that you don't have? He said tan suit. Valerie Jarrett said he gave it away cleaning out his closet. So my editor put me on assignment to find it. And Jill, I have to say, this is, as I wrote in my opening column for the Sun Times, it's not just finding a needle in a haystack. I don't even know where the haystack is. And get out a way to write this down or remember it or type it in your iPhone, everyone. You want to go to the landing page for all this tan suit information I'm unearthing and my first story. Simplest way is to go to suntimes.com/tan suit. I'm going to repeat it. Suntimes, one word, suntimes.com/tan suit. So I have gotten some breaks, Jill, because I didn't know how I would even start. So on June 18 was the dedication of the Obama Center. Marty Nesbitt, who's the chair of the foundation, who's a good friend of Obama, he wore a tan suit and he almost displayed it, opened the jacket. It was a replica outfit, white shirt, striped tie. Stephen Colbert wore a tan suit. And Colbert, in one of his last episodes of the show, was at the museum and he held up a picture of Obama at that press conference and he said, "Is the tan suit here?" So he thought it should have been here. Marty Nesbitt kind of reprises it. Larry David on his HBO comedy sketch show, just 2 weeks ago, they released the last episode, and lo and behold, the last skit in the final show was Obama playing himself in a hilarious bit about, supposedly it wasn't true, why Obama ended up in the tan suit. And at first when I saw it, I thought the suit looked so alike. I thought, oh my God, did they find it? No, the answer is no, it was a replica of the suit. It was they never found it. So all this kind of, I understand how I could build on it, but also I knew it would be a long shot if I find the suit. I'm not giving up on it, Jill, because I haven't tried hard enough yet to find it. But I always know just to be tidy, and maybe you like to do this as a lawyer. You like to know when the story begins. And in my case, I wanted to know who made the suit. I'm sure you would do it if you were doing this too. Let's just be tidy. Okay, number one, who made the suit? Because maybe they would know something. So the suit was made by a man named Martin Greenfield, famous Brooklyn tailor who died in 2024. But his story is he sewed his first stitches as a young teen in Auschwitz, repairing the collar of the shirt of a Nazi soldier.
Oh my God.
He would survive Auschwitz. He would survive Wilkenwald. He would come to Brooklyn, learn how to be a tailor, and he would end up making suits for presidents, including Obama. And, in a subsequent story, I'll tell you how the Obama team got connected to him. It's a good Chicago connection. And if you think I'm teasing you a little bit, it's because I want you to go on our page and start following what we're doing. We kind of say some of the stories that are coming up. But everyone I've talked to, it seems, did have an interest when I said the origin story as much as the story of how Obama did it. So I'm approaching this very long shot chance of finding a suit as a journey that I want to take everyone with me on.
Well, you had me at Auschwitz. That certainly got my attention. But I also have to say, listening to you now and the coverage, which, just Google the tan suit and you will see, all of you listeners will see how important this story was, even though, of course, it is totally irrelevant. But it reminds me of the coverage of me during Watergate. Headlines read, "Watergate miniskirted attorney today questioned." It started with what I wore rather than starting with what I was doing, what I was asking, who the witnesses were. And of course, back then it was totally sexist that they weren't reporting Richard Van Venista today wearing a pinstripe suit, question so-and-so. They only did that for me. And pictures of me were always full length, whereas pictures of Richard and Jim, my other partners in the trial, were of just their headshots. So that was sexist. Do you think there was any racism in the coverage of the tan suit?
Excellent point. I'm glad you brought it up because, yes, the nation's first Black president gets hit because he wears a tan suit. Look, President Reagan wore a tan suit. Now, it may be not exactly comparable because Obama wore it to a press event with a very serious event. And I get it. I talked to a historian who said maybe you have to see what Reagan was doing that day, or Bill Clinton. But even if it's not 100% analogous, this also speaks to the other areas I hope to deal with in this. Clothing, was it a racist response, and what do you see it from 2014 to 2026, where now Obama and company are kind of all in on the joke now. There's going to be a tan suit day coming up August 28th that the Obama Foundation is promoting. Everybody wear a tan suit. And I think sometimes when you embrace something, you kind of strip the person who throws the dart at you. You kind of say, whatever, look at Obamacare. It was done as a derogatory term hurled at the Affordable Care Act by the Republican critics, or any critic. But I thought it was a pretty cool nickname. And in time, so did the Obama people, and they embraced it.
And it honors him. It gives the credit where the credit is due. It gives the credit to Obama.
But yes, that's true. But I think Obamacare is just easier to say than the Affordable Care Act, where you might not be sure. Is that the thing with my health insurance?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need, if something is snappy, it doesn't always have to be negative. And these might be some of the questions I get into. I want to talk about, then and now. I'll have an interview with the man who was the White House press secretary at the time, what he thinks then and now, presidential historians. And I had a really good interview with the people who did the Larry David Barack Obama series. And
when will that be out?
When I have in the next few weeks.
Okay.
I have a bunch of stories, and I have to figure out what I want to do on Tan Suit Day on the 28th. I'm
going to wear a tan suit for sure.
Okay, meaning I'm on this journey. I have different buckets. Bucket one is, what am I going to do to find the tan suit? I'm in Washington today, and I'm going to be talking with people. I need to, my working theory is he donated it in Washington somewhere between 2014 and 2016. So I want to get a handle on who worked at secondhand stores at the time. So that's kind of bucket one, just finding it. And then where the story flows, the story of Martin Greenfield. And I talked to his son, Jay and Todd, his sons. Jay actually measured Obama. They're still working at the Brooklyn shop. We'll have we sent our chief videographer there, so we'll have a video out on it. And I have the telling of that. So I have just a lot of notes in my notebook that I've got to start writing these stories. But I also think it's important to talk to people like you and anyone who wants to talk to me about it, because somebody somewhere knows something. Or you just might be in the Washington area and a tall man who wears a 40 long and a nice suit that he got at a secondhand store a few years ago. I don't know.
Look, I have another story for you.
Okay.
I donated the suit I wore the day I questioned Rosemary Woods, which was captured in photographs, to a charity, but I don't remember which one, and it was sold at auction. So maybe you can find my brown velvet suit. And if you want to see a picture, I don't know if I'll screw up our video, but I'm going to keep talking as I go get. Okay. I think I might have a picture of it. Right. Well, actually, hold on. I have one.
Okay. I'll keep talking. Obama, as far as I know, donated it. It wasn't for sale or anything to a charity, though. My God, whoever has it now, it is probably worth something. I'm on the quest for the pure motive of finding it, to see where it ended up.
Okay.
Just in case the Obama people want to consider putting it in a museum. Okay, so now
I can't see.
I can see it.
Okay, so this is my book.
I see it.
In the book, there's a picture of the Rosemary stretch here, and right below it, there's a picture of me coming out of the White House after questioning her in the White House about the stretch. And that's the suit that got auctioned off. So maybe someone has my brown velvet mini skirted suit.
As long as you're putting out a call.
Yes, right.
But
tell Lynn Sweet so that she can find the tan suit and the brown suit.
Let me tell people how to find me. Here's the email: tansuit, one word, @suntimes.com. That's tansuit@suntimes.com. Where do you find my suit?
Let me ask you, what do you expect to actually find the suit? And then I have another question for
Okay,
you.
so here's the thing. I expect to, it's too early in the process to know. If I were in your profession, I'd say I'm still in discovery. So
Okay, that's an
I have,
important part.
yeah, I just don't know. But I know if I don't try, I don't know what happens. You know, there's a saying, this was some slogan in an ad for the lottery: if you don't play, you can't win.
Right.
So I'm just playing. I am very seriously trying to do what I think it takes to find it. Do I think it's a long shot? Sure. I mean, that's
Well,
why I wrote that line. It's more than a needle in a haystack. I don't know where the haystack is. Now, maybe it is in Washington that he gave it away. It probably, resident staff handled it for him, or some staff, I believe it happened when he was still in the White House, which is why the years 2014, 2016. But if, let's say, somebody misinformed me and he gave it away when he moved to his house in Calorama, which is a neighborhood in Washington, maybe whoever handled it said, I'm going to be driving up to Delaware for the weekend. I'll give it to donate it there. And I do know, as many hand-stitched suits, your name is put in it. I'm told that the staff knows enough to cut it out before they donate Obama suits. But because I talked to Jay, the son of Martin Greenfield, there are ways we could authenticate that suit in a minute if we ever found it. So at first I thought, when I started this, if I found it, how will I know it's the real thing?
Yeah.
Well, I know enough about the suit, and Jay knows the fabric, and we know stuff about it, that if we have it, we can authenticate it.
excellent. So I actually lived on the other side of Connecticut from Calorama. I lived at Calorama Circle, but on the Adams Morgan side. So he was sort of my neighbor, although I had already moved to Chicago by then.
Uh-huh.
But I have a question for you you mentioned about the name Obamacare and how it was meant to be derogatory, but ended up being really, I think, a very good shorthand. In Illinois, in Evanston, we have reparations, and it's getting a lot of pushback because it is misnamed. Reparations seems to carry with it the view that we are paying reparations for Civil War damages, when in fact the program in Evanston is intended to pay for the damage that Evanston did much more recently in redlining and mortgages and in hurting people of color, the Black population of Evanston. So I've been trying to think of what would be a better name so that we could rename now, when I say we, so I could suggest to the mayor of Evanston, who will soon be leaving to become the representative of my district. I live in Evanston, in taking Jan Schakowsky's place in Congress. So do you have any ideas on naming, or could you get the Sun-Times to start a survey to see what people would suggest it be called to represent what it really is, instead of making it sound like it's Civil War reparations?
Well, you bring up a lot. I'm not deep in that issue at all. And I will, I don't want to commit an organization to something,
Right.
but I will say, I'm going to use a lawyerly term. Jill, I'm going to take that under advisement.
Okay, well, am I
On it.
training you to be a lawyer here? I mean, I don't know. You do a good job as a journalist, and
No,
so
but you bring up some very serious points, and the last thing I want to do is be flippant about
yeah,
something as serious as what Evanston is doing in its effort.
right.
So
I'm going to
it's
try
really
to ask Billy Ray, who has been a guest of mine when I've been on WCPT in the past, and he's a screenwriter of great note. He did Hunger Games and Captain Phillips and The Shattered Glass. I mean, all really great films. He has a new one coming out shortly. And he, when Trump first got elected, went, the Democrats need messaging help. And as a screenwriter, that's what I do. I create messages, and I'm going to volunteer. And he now represents at least 80 members of Congress and some governors in terms of messaging. So maybe I will text him and ask if he has any ideas
Okay, well,
about
this
how
could
to
be your thing.
name.
Also,
Yeah,
Jill, you have a big social media presence. Maybe just telling people to, you organize the effort to
good idea.
have a
Good idea.
conversation with you. I
I'm
mean,
going to do a
look,
follow-up to this show
I
with him.
know, you have the ability to be a big convener because of the crowds you have drawn with your podcast with your colleagues.
Thank
So
you.
organize something in Evanston to have a discussion, even if it's a small. Sometimes people think everything has to be big, like your book, a big auditorium. Even if
Yeah,
you organize something in the library,
yeah,
because
that's a
people
great
are
idea.
interested in what you say. You could say, I want a conversation about what here's the program, right program,
Right,
wrong name.
right. Excellent
I
idea.
mean,
Thank
you
you.
could
I'm going
do
to
it.
follow up on that. I think
I'll
that's
come. I'll
perfect.
sit in the audience. You'll have one person come.
Okay.
But
I'll
I'm
have to
not an
do it when you're in
Evanstonian.
Chicago visiting us here.
Well, but no, I mean, so the point is that our point is kind of the same. A tan suit took on a life larger than being a tan suit because to some people it symbolized something. The word reparation turns out in your argument a misnomer for what a public policy is really about.
Right.
And one of the things I think when we talk about our civic literacy is that it's hard to even know what you don't know. And when you have the description messaging of what a public policy is, and it's not on point, or somebody takes a snapshot like of that suit, you have a conversation that just boomerangs and is on there. But on the other hand, still revealing. And when we talk about the arc of history, somewhere that tan suit, for all the reasons we've discussed, does mark a point in Obama history. Valerie Jarrett said they didn't want to put a replica in because we know a replica exists that they got for the show. And I know that the suit makers, Jay and Todd, could make another suit if the museum ordered it for display. Now, even maybe in the telling of time, they'll just order up a replica to tell the story. Museums are not static, and the exhibits you see, if you go to the museum in the next few months, may not be there in 10 years. Some of the First Lady's clothing on display, that will rotate out as time goes by too. So museums aren't quite as static as, whatever you think, they change.
And it's interesting that museums always display First Ladies' clothes. I don't know of any that display the president's clothes. Hopefully someday it'll be the first gentleman's clothes. But we're out of time, and I hope that anyone listening who has a clue for Lynn to follow will call in when we get to the question segment, and or tag me on social media. Any of my I'm on everything. I'm on X, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Threads, and you name it, I'm there. So please let me know what you think about either the reparations name or the tan suit. And thank you, Lynn, for being with us. I hope you'll come back and join us again sometime.
It's an honor to be with you. And if you get any tips, Jill, forward them to me at tansuit@suntimes.com. Thank you again for having me on.
Thank you.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Hey, Victor Shee, are you with me now? Well, it doesn't sound like Victor's here. Are we on there? Victor? Okay, so we're back on air, and this is the Edwin Eisendrath Show, but this is Jill Wine-Banks, and I'm really happy to be here today. There's so much happening in the news, and my next guest is wonderful. I hope you enjoyed Lynn Sweet and learned about her search for the tan suit, and that you'll help her find it, and help me find a word for reparations in Evanston instead of reparations. But my next guest is Victor Shi, who is a political strategist and a comms consultant. I would say he was formerly my mentee and the founder of my introduction to podcasts. We had a show called iGen Politics, actually originally Intergenerational Politics. Then it got more fancy and became iGen Politics. And then he grew up and he's at work full time now. So I'm really excited because I love talking to Victor. How are you, Victor?
1 second. We're still
okay.
figuring something out.
Apparently there's still a technical problem here. But I'm going to be talking to Victor about a bunch of topics. And after that, we're going to be taking some questions. So start thinking about questions you have for me or for Lynn, or, well, not for Lynn. I'll pass them on to her. And then for Victor, I want to talk about the midterms and the presidential in 28. I want to talk about, he's in L.A., so obviously I want to know what's going on in L.A. with the mayor's race, the governors, with, former Representative Swalwell, whose house has now been searched in a criminal investigation. And Victor and I used to talk a lot about ranked choice voting. And I'm starting to see the benefits of ranked choice, so I'd love to talk to him about that, as well as California is proposing a billionaire tax. That's really interesting. And because he's a political consultant, I want to talk to him about some of the truly fake polls. We just learned that a company that isn't really a company, it's a fake front for a social experiment, and they actually released poll numbers that they made up, completely, totally made them up. And I worry that that could impact how people voted. And they did it in Wisconsin, which is near and dear to my heart, and in L.A. as well, where I wonder how much it affected it. It showed Mayor Karen Bass 20 points ahead of her opponent when they had no data to back that up. So I wonder very much whether or not that could be something that made people say, well, what's the point of voting? She's so far ahead, she's going to win. I don't have to vote for her because she's ahead. Or what's the point of voting for her opponent because she's going to lose? That's a horrible thing to have happen. I don't know if there are any penalties for such a fake news. I hope there are, because I think it's a terrible thing. And maybe you have some views you'd like to share with me in the questions after this discussion with Victor, if we ever get Victor. But I don't know where he is. Do you have his phone number that you could call? Okay, so let's call Victor and see if we can get him. In the meantime, I could talk about, well, for example, Justice Roberts, who used the opportunity to allow continued construction of the, quote, ballroom military complex, which is really a golden homage to President Trump, to his aesthetics. And by the way, he's also trying to use his aesthetics to revert to World War II look for Navy ships, to an earlier technology for launching flights from a naval carrier. Instead of the more modern magnetic system, he wants to go back to a totally steam-operated thing. I don't know why he thinks that's a better look, or why he would spend the money that it takes to get that look, and the delay that would be a result, so that the ships will not be put to sea for many years after they would have otherwise, and many billions of dollars over that. It's a disgusting thing. So we have Victor. Okay, Victor.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm glad you're here. I've been filling the time until I could talk to you. So it's excellent. I already introduced you. You probably didn't hear that because you weren't here. But I listed a bunch of things that I wanted to talk to you about, and I don't even know where to start. I was just talking about the truly fake polls that were just announced. And do you think that that had any impact on the mayoral primary in L.A.?
I don't. I think what had more of an impact on the mayoral primary than any. I mean, a lot of people were concerned about the AI videos. People were scared that Spencer Pratt might do, better than than we expected. But it turns out he got beat pretty badly in the primary. And so I think, at the end of the day, politicians just have to go out there, meet people where they're at, and I think voters, for as much information as there is out there, I think they can detect when, they're being misled.
Right.
And I think polls, AI videos are all examples of that.
Yeah, I'm worried now. They did this as a social experiment, and they just totally formed a company days before they announced these poll results, and they made them up. They had done no research or anything, and they just announced that Karen Bass was 20 points ahead. And so I worry that it could affect how people vote. Why bother voting for her? She's so far ahead, she doesn't need my vote. Or why bother voting for any opponent because they can't possibly overcome a 20-point lead. And that scares me, that there's no seeming penalty for them having done this. And I'm just wondering if anyone in California or in Wisconsin, where they also had fake polls, is thinking about legislation to punish people who put out total fake polls that could influence voting. Any word on that?
I don't have anything on that, but I do think there's also an angle of market manipulation here. I mean, there's a huge wave of sports betting, but also now political betting. If you go on Kalshi or Polymarket or some of these betting websites, you'll see that there are a lot of people now betting on races. And so there was a story in the LA Times. The reporter who broke the story about the fake poll was on CNN that night, basically talking about how there should be more investigation into how much the person who made this poll was trying to influence the markets. And if he was trying to influence the markets, then that could also, give people a tilted way of when they, bet for the mayor, when they bet for another candidate, and they could totally throw things off in that way and instill a false sense of confidence in the election. So that's another angle, that with this wave of betting that people should be careful about, is not trusting the betting markets and just doing the work. I mean, there's no replacement for that. That's
for sure. Of course, that sounds a lot to me like Donald Trump selling early access to what he calls market-moving posts that he does for $100,000 a month. That's not $100,000 a year. It's $100,000 a month to get his posts early enough that you could buy into the market or sell off before the market changes because of something he says or does, which brings us, of course, to the tariffs and the fact that we are now in really bad shape. The negotiations with Canada have been terminated, called off, and Canada now says they will match our tariff with an equal tariff to us, which means our prices are going to go way up on both ends. And I can certainly understand why the Mark Carney would do that, because he's got to protect his workers and his consumers as well. So we're in a bad way in America right now with an uncontrolled president. So there you are.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you about another piece of legislation that's in California, which is the billionaire tax, which the SEIU union in California has been pushing, and it's now on the ballot for November, and it's pretty controversial. Do you have any work that you're doing on this or any opinion on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, it's definitely on the top of mind for a lot of California voters that I talk to. The governor and the candidate for the governor position, Javier Becerra, have both come out opposing the ballot measure, but the party, labor unions, healthcare workers, nurses, teachers, they've all come and supported the ballot measure. So it's causing a very, very, very real divide in the party. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens because, like Newsom and Becerra, they say that this should be national, that California shouldn't start this movement. But I think the people who want this to happen are saying, well, we have no other choice because of the big, beautiful bill that Trump passed last year. Healthcare clinics and hospitals and nurses, they're all being cut short now. And there's a real chance that if we don't find more money, that we will see pretty devastating effects. And so I think a lot of people feel like, I don't know. I just feel like I personally think this is a good idea, and think that, the amount of money that the billionaires are spending on this shows you that there is money out there. These billionaires can contribute. It would only apply to 250 billionaires who would just pay a 1% tax for 5 years to help offset some of the effects of the big beautiful bill. And I think if California can show the nation that this could be successful, then maybe we could do a national tax as well. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of this isn't an issue that Congress is really paying much attention to. So maybe this is the way to get Congress to wake up and consider something like this across the nation, as the other parts of the nation also are affected by the big beautiful bill.
Okay, let me just explain to our listeners a little bit more about what this is. It is a proposal that would apply only to billionaires in California, and as Victor just said, there's only 250 of them. The details are a little unclear as to how we determine who is a billionaire. Is that based on their assets or their annual income? So that needs some definition for me. But the complaint is that billionaires are going to move out of California, and that it will hurt California if they leave. I wonder where they would go. I mean, that's part of the problem. And if it works in California, then, as you just said, it could become national. And so we still have some time. But that's the issue, and I'm interested in how that's going to come out in November, whether we will have that pass, and then we'll see whether it works, whether all the billionaires leave, and how much have they spent so far?
Well, collectively, I don't know, but I know the top person who's opposed to this is Sergey Brin, who is the founder of Google. He has spent up to this point $100 million total on this, and that's apparently just scratching the surface of how much more he's going to spend on this until November. So one person alone has spent $100 million on this, opposing it. And so I know they're up against, historically ballot measures in California that have faced a large amount of money. They have not fared very well. So we'll see how much of it. I mean, it's going to make a dent. It's a lot of money, but I bet that they're who are opposing this. I know Elon Musk is opposed to this. I know some of the tech leaders are opposed to this in Silicon Valley, and so it's going to be a pretty uphill battle. But I do think, if they really felt like they had a lot of money, they could also spend that money in other places to help healthcares that are closing down.
Yes.
And so, they're spending
Let
it now
them pay
to
the
oppose
taxes
this
instead of fighting this, and think how much good they could do with it.
Right.
That would be really, really great. Let's talk a little bit about ranked choice voting.
Yeah.
But let's take a break first. Okay. We'll be right back to you, Victor.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Welcome back, and I'm still Jill Wine-Banks, not Edwin Eisendrath, and my guest is Victor Shi, a political strategist and comms consultant, and my former partner on a podcast that was called Intergenerational Politics, or iGen Politics. He then worked for Mayor Bass, and, in between he worked for President Biden's campaign, and then Kamala Harris's campaign, and then for Karen Bass, and then has done some other very interesting things in between. But he is a big proponent of ranked choice voting, and that's a subject that fascinates me, especially as I see the votes being divided by so many candidates. So, Victor, would that help so that we would end up not with the minority-approved candidate winning because that candidate didn't split the vote? It was the only outlier. What do you think?
I do. And ranked choice voting is especially useful nowadays because I hear a lot more people than even when I first started researching and writing about this subject, which is people do not like choosing the lesser of two evils. Ranked choice voting allows people to rank from favorite to least favorite, and it allows for more civil campaigns too, because like we saw in New York, Brad Lander and Zoran Mamdani, two very different people, tried to reach out to both of their audiences to maximize their likelihood of opposing Cuomo. And I think that there's something to that you just don't get with a regular system. And so I think a lot of it would help right now, especially when, a lot of people are scared about the far left of the party. A lot of people think that the Democratic Party is too big a tent. Well, with ranked choice voting, we can put all of that out there, and it allows for a more fair system, I think. And, you can actually, you don't have to choose between two people. You can choose and make your voice heard among all the people who are running for office.
It could be really interesting. I mean, I was following the Wisconsin gubernatorial very closely, and that was so interesting, with candidates dropping out and then 10 days before the election coming back in, and others dropping out, and there were, I don't remember, 9 or 10 different candidates, and it looked like a social democrat was going to win, who ended up being beaten by someone who came back into the race 10 days earlier. But I wonder if there had been ranked choice voting, if that would have been necessary for an old candidate to come back in, and that it would have been divided up in a different way, instead of sort of the middle of the party splitting the votes so much that the far left candidate was getting more votes than any, not as many as all of them combined, but more than any one of them alone. So that, don't you think that would have helped if we had had ranked choice voting?
I think so, because the way that ranked choice voting works is that if no one reaches a majority of the vote, then you have to retabulate the votes until someone reaches a majority. So maybe, the second place person in the first round isn't your top choice, but at least you're okay with that person and to be cut to, if the votes are realigned, for that person to end up on top. And so, but it ensures whoever wins has the majority of the votes.
Right.
And so in that way, I would think that most people would be satisfied with whoever comes out on top.
Yeah.
And it also there's a lot of research that shows that campaigns are more civil, that people are more satisfied with their choices of who ends up making it to the general election, who ends up winning. And a majority of people are bound to support them, because that's just how the math ends up working out. No one can win without a majority of the votes.
Right. And just for listeners who don't know how it works, the person who has the least votes is dropped after the ranked choice, and the people who voted for that candidate, their second choice gets their vote. So then it could be maybe the second choice was the person who was on the top, and then that person has the majority. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's the second or third, and that person then has enough. And you keep dropping out the lowest vote getter on each round until someone has the majority vote. And that does mean everyone's vote counts, and it weighs in on who the final candidate is. So I'm sort of liking that, and I don't know if there's an effort nationwide to implement ranked choice voting. Do you know anything about if there is such a national thing?
I don't know if there's a bill. I mean, I'm sure. I believe legislation has been introduced, but it seems to be much more state by state. But I do know more states are using it. I mean, Alaska was one. Right. Alaska and Maine were one of the first users of this, and then New York, and there's some other cities testing it out. And so it's really great. And also, voters overseas and military members have used this. They were the first to use this, and so it's actually been implemented in quite a lot of spaces, and so it would make sense for me.
Overseas voters got to do ranked choice and mail ballots. Okay, how about that? Good for them. Of course, the president uses a mail ballot, but he doesn't want anyone else to.
Right.
He's the only one important enough. So, okay, let's see. We still have a few more minutes left. Maybe I'm going to ask you, I don't know if you know anything about the search of Swalwell's house and what they were looking for and what they found. Any reports on that?
I don't have any reports on that. I mean, I saw that Swalwell is now, his house got raided, or I guess his home in D.C., which is where he lived, not actually in California, got raided over last week. And
not raided. It was on a search warrant. That's not a raid.
On a search. Got it.
It was a legal search pursuant to a warrant presented to a judge who said there's probable cause to think that there might be evidence in this location. So I just want everyone to know that. Well, okay, so let me ask you a different thing, which is just prediction. And I know we said we shouldn't be using the betting markets, and I agree with that. But you're really deep in political strategy. What do you think the midterms are going to result in? Is it going to be a Republican or a Democratic landslide?
I think the House, I'm very, very bullish about the House. I think there should be, unless a miracle happens, I don't think Republicans will take control, will maintain control of the House. It seems to be very good for Democrats. All indications show that the president's approval ratings are very low, and races earlier this year show that, with Trump not on the ballot, Republicans tend to not be doing so great. And so I'm pretty bullish about that. The Senate is a little trickier. Obviously, there are some interesting races in Texas. I feel pretty good about Ossoff maintaining his seat, but it seems like, we're going to have to do some uniting here, and especially in places like Michigan, where Abdullah, I'll say it, has been a pretty controversial figure among some more moderate Democrats. But I would just say, if we want to maintain the Senate, people have to stay united. Yeah. I really love what Haley Stevens has done after her loss. Just seeing how she's united and thrown her support for Abdul is just really incredible. We need more of that in Florida with Angie Nixon. I know she's a Democratic socialist, but I still think that they would be far better than having a MAGA Republican in the Senate representing Florida. So as many differences as we have with maybe some of the far left folks in the party, I think that we have to do our best to support them and push them to be better. I
couldn't agree with you more. It is absolutely essential because I have to say, even if we had a significant majority, we're not going to have a veto-proof majority. And if we don't have veto-proof, it means that we can't pass positive legislation because it will be vetoed. But we can prevent bad things from happening. We can stop the flow of money so that, or reassert the power of war and the power of the purse. So I think it's really important. And people should listen, because Al Sayed, if you listen to him, he's actually pretty reasonable and pretty persuasive. And I haven't listened to Nixon so much. And every time I hear the name, of course, I get revolted, because I hear the name Nixon and it means to me Richard M. Nixon. And I'm sorry, Angie. I don't know if you should change your name, but I'll have to get used to another Nixon who's totally on the opposite end of the spectrum from the other Nixon. But yeah, I mean, if I were there, I would be voting for those people. So, Victor, we're out of time. I'm so sorry. I know you have a heart out, and I'm going to let you go.
I can stay for another five minutes or so, 10 minutes or so, if you want to keep talking.
Sure. Okay, 5 more minutes. Is that okay with the studio says yes, we can keep talking.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, well then, in that case, we'll move from the midterms to who's going to be the Democratic candidate. You mentioned Ossoff, who is turning into quite a hero. I mean, it used to be your governor, Newsom, was like the best spokesman. And then we had, a lot of people were saying, Governor Shapiro, Governor Pritzker, Governor Bashir, all of those. And I don't know. What do you think? Is there a candidate? Rahm Emanuel, I'm thinking of all the Chicagoans that are in the sort of mix here. What do you think? And there is a big, I'm Jewish, but let me ask. I mean, a lot of people are saying we have to have Mark Kelly. He's a white male, moderate. He's a hero. He's an astronaut. He's a war hero. He has taken care of his wife, who was a wonderful member of Congress and was shot and very seriously injured. That he's the man that the Democrats need, and that he can learn to be a better speaker and a better policymaker. So what do you think? Are you backing a candidate yet?
I still think it's early. My dream, I think Ossoff is doing everything right now. I love what he's doing, connecting corruption to people's everyday lives, and it's really showing how, every way that they profit is making your life worse and more expensive. So I think John Ossoff is right now the model, but I have some friends who's working on his campaign, and they're saying he's very adamant about not running. I actually agree. Like he's pretty young. He shouldn't give up his Senate seat 2 years into being reelected. Everyone's saying, like Talarico should also run. I kind of disagree. I mean, I just think whoever ends up running, they really have to have an affirmative vision for the future. I think it's going to be very, very essential for people to know what the Democratic Party stands for. For Mamdani, people knew that he ran on, maybe some unrealistic, as some may have said. People knew what he was running on. People knew that he wanted to freeze rent and to
free
make
buses
things more affordable
and grocery stores.
City-run grocery stores, exactly. But whoever ends up on top, I really think that people need to know what Democrats stand for, and I think there will be a lot of that. I'm excited for the primary. I think a lot of our ideas will be tested there, but it's a big bench, and I think that there's a lot of folks out there. Our home state governor, J.B. Pritzker, I really like.
I love him.
And think that he has an advantage because he doesn't have to raise as much money. He has a large sum of money, but I think there's a lot. Andy Bashir and, like you said, Mark Kelly, Newsom. There's just a lot of folks who are really stepping up right now, and we'll see. I mean, AOC is said to be a dark horse, so
right.
We'll see. I think we'll
so
know
that's
a
the
lot
other
more after the
candidate
midterms.
We're talking about. There's a lot of Jewish people that we've mentioned in this list, and a woman, and there are other women that I would say could be on the list, but the risk of, do we run a woman? I hate to say this because I want in my lifetime to see a female president. I also want to see, of course, the Equal Rights Amendment passed, and I'm hoping to talk to, my last guest today is the Attorney General of Illinois, Kwame Raoul, who brought a lawsuit trying to bring about the Equal Rights Amendment. And so I can't wait to talk to him about that, as well as a number of other very interesting topics when he's on. He's brought, the tariffs. He has a lawsuit pending on the tariffs. And since we now have Canadian tariffs coming on September 8th, I think it'll be highly likely that I will talk to him about tariffs. And also his lawsuit about the AR-15 is going to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court accepted it for the October term. So I want to talk to him about that. So that'll be an interesting segment. I hope everyone will stay with me for that. But we also, I think we have time for some questions now. So thank you for being with me, Victor. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
And I hope I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sounds great. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. All right, we got Jim on the line.
Jim, what's your question?
Constitutional law.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
Jill, I
That's
apologize.
Me. It's me. I'm waiting for your question.
No, I apologize.
No problem.
Barack Obama I was under the impression he was a constitutional student. Constitutional law
Yes.
was his
He taught
favorite.
constitutional law.
Yeah, and some of the big law firms were, looking to hire him. But is constitutional law, Jill, going the way of Latin that I struggled with for 3 years in high school? Because when constitutional law are we in a period where whoever the president's elected will become a law unto himself? Now, the Supreme Court and then rank and file Republicans believe that if they win their election, that whoever that person is will dictate the law.
Well,
I don't know how long we can go on like this. But it's certainly, the Constitution's lasted for, 250 years? But this is, what do you think, Jill?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. I think it's very important that we think about what this means and what it means in terms of the Supreme Court, because that's why he's getting away with this. But it's also Congress. So let me address both of those aspects, because if Congress wasn't dead on arrival, if they hadn't gone to sleep and just let him do what he wants, they do have powers to stop he's committing war crimes, and they're funding the war. And they're not passing a war resolution. They're letting him go ahead and violate the Constitution and the laws that say he needs congressional approval. So that's a problem. You have the Supreme Court that said he has immunity. But But I want to remind people it's not total absolute immunity. It's immunity for things like declaring a emergency, because that's one of his constitutional powers. But it isn't for defaming Stormy Daniels or E. Jean Carroll, because those are private acts. And there's a category of things that are in his constitutional powers, and those are, he has criminal immunity. But there are things that are in what's called the penumbra, sort of the shadow of his powers, and those are rebuttable immunity. You can say why it isn't. And then there are some things that are so totally personal that there's absolutely no immunity, and he can and should be held accountable. And I go back to the era of Watergate when there was some accountability. Richard Nixon resigned after articles of impeachment were passed, and my team gave a smoking gun tape to the Congress, and the three top Republicans went to the White House and said, "We've heard this tape. You're guilty. You will be convicted by the Senate." But now we've had overwhelming evidence of crimes that are impeachable offenses, which aren't necessarily crimes under Title 18 U.S.C. or any state law. But there was clear evidence that he had done things that were impeachable. And yet the Republicans said, "Oh, we'll let the criminal courts take care of it. We're not going to impeach him." And, of course, then they stopped the criminal courts from doing it. So he has evaded his liability. I hope, because he's committing crimes every day and violations of laws every single day, I hope that in a new administration there will be accountability. The statute of limitations won't have run. But to your question about, is the Constitution done? Well, sort of, because the interpretation by the Supreme Court is ignoring not only precedent and going in new directions for no reason at all, but they're changing their decision-making process. So, for example, they say that they are literalists, that they are interpreting it as the exact words and based on how it was interpreted when the Constitution was passed. But when it comes to guns, for example, the Constitution says for a well-maintained militia, and guns then were muskets. They weren't automatic weapons that could kill hundreds of people in seconds, well, maybe in minutes. And it's a different thing to say that than to say you can't control an AR-15. So you're right to be concerned about what's happening to the Constitution. Richard Nixon believed that if he did it, it was not illegal, and that he had the total power. And obviously, Donald Trump is getting that lesson. I'm going to be talking to Jim Robenalt, who is a lawyer, a historian, an author, and my friend. And one of the things we're going to talk about is he wrote a book that looks at the Vietnam War and the mistakes that Nixon made and how Donald Trump hasn't learned the lesson of the Vietnam War. Of course, he wasn't part of the Vietnam War because he had bone spurs and he couldn't serve. So we'll see about that. But I think that was a great question. I hope I answered it in some way. It's hard to answer. I don't know. Do we have any other callers? We do. Okay, we have another caller.
We got Cynthia from Denver ready to go.
Cynthia from Denver, you're on air. What's your question?
Hi, Jill. I enjoy your analysis completely. I wanted to ask you for your messaging to the Democrats, to be their helper. If they could start sharing why the corruption is so blatant and that there is corruption going on and how they plan to reverse what damage he has done and also how to hold him accountable. I think if that was like the main theme, like running it on a billboard every time, or not a billboard, but what do you call those?
Yeah, billboards. Billboards are those big things on the highway.
Yeah, and then on TV, you know how it runs across at the bottom.
Right.
You know, so we know that the Democrats are aware. Without them, with them not saying anything right now, or you know, on a wider platform, I feel like a hostage.
Good point, Cynthia. And I have a friend named Cynthia in Denver, so I don't know if you're in the same place or not, but you aren't.
Yeah, I'm in
I can
Denver.
tell from your voice that you're not my friend. I mean, you could be my friend, but you're not the Cynthia that I know. Anyway, I think that anybody who is listening to WCPT or to MS Now or to the hashtag Sisters-in-Law podcast that I'm on, or reading really reliable newspapers, they're getting the story. They know the corruption. Who doesn't know that Donald Trump made $2.2 billion since he's been in office? And his son-in-law has made at least as much, if not more. His daughter, it's an absurdity. The plane that Qatar gave him, that we, the taxpayers, are paying to retrofit so that he can fly in it, and then he's going to take it with him? That is a clear violation of the Emoluments Clause. Absolutely no doubt about it. And why Congress hasn't stopped it, I don't know. They should.
The ballroom. And also, Bill, you know,
all the gold in the Oval Office, all the gold statues he's putting up, and this potential thing that will block the view of Arlington Cemetery, a sacred site in my view. It's obscene. And retrofitting the Navy ships that are underway to be more old-fashioned looking and to have more old-fashioned technology because he thinks it looks better. What is his aesthetic, and what made him an engineer? I mean, it's absurd.
You know, just like John Ossoff, when he talks, he connects the dots with because you don't have health care is because they have tax breaks. You know, just cut it down to simplicity. You know, the way you're paying more gas is because he chose a war that he didn't have to do, you know, because it's the least amongst us that's going to be the deciding factor in our country. They are the ones that need to know without a shadow of a doubt what's going on, because there's too many of them that don't know they don't know why they're paying more. They don't know why the groceries are higher. They just don't know.
I think even Republicans are now coming to realize that he's not delivered on his promises, and that you can't pass a gas station and not go, oh, how much am I going to have to pay for this tank of gas? Or go to the grocery store and your bill is at least 30 or 40% higher than it was when he took office. You see that every single day. And then they cut off SNAP, and they put in this. We're paying how much for the ballroom that he said was going to be paid for by private donors? No, it's not. And the $300 million it was supposed to cost is now more than double that, and will easily be triple that, and we don't need it. I interviewed two people from the Obama White House who worked in the East Wing and who were very emotional about not only the loss of the East Wing, but the fact that when they talk about we had to have these events in tents. These aren't tents like the homeless are living in, or the unhoused, as they are now called, along Lakeshore Drive in Chicago or anywhere else. I'm sure it's in Denver as well.
Right.
They are phenomenally beautiful, air-conditioned, well-decorated. They look like a ballroom. And how often is the ballroom needed? Why do we need to spend, I don't know, $1 billion on a golden blazoned, gaudy, horrible-looking thing? There's no reason for it. It is a waste of our money, and he destroyed a historic part of our White House that does not belong to him. And I can only hope that whoever the next president is removes all of the gold that he has put up, because it makes me nauseous. I worked in Russia for a while. It looks like Russia, except tackier.
It's probably who he's modeling after.
Yes.
I would also like to say quickly that, if the messaging could also connect, that he's a liar. He's a liar.
Yes, and your idea about the scrolling at the bottom of a television set,
Right.
anytime he speaks, there should be a scroll that goes, lie, here's the fact. I
Right.
think all of his speeches should be delay broadcast in
Right.
order to give time for a fact checker to be able to put up a thing that says, not true, here's the fact. Because he lies every time he opens his mouth. He says things that are simply not. He says gas prices aren't going up. I mean, it's so awful. I can't even begin. But I'm glad that you like John Ossoff, and I'm glad that you are asking these questions. But it's up to you to get yourself and all your friends and family and strangers to vote. Because and the other thing is, everybody should learn one or two facts totally so strong that when someone says, well, it's Obama's fault or it's Biden's fault, because they are still blaming Obama and Biden for they've been in office for way too long to be blaming them. And so you need to just have one fact, whatever that fact is, that he promised that there would be no forever wars. Well, what's happening right now? We have a lot of people who have died in this war, and we need to stop it. So please just make sure you get out to vote.
I will.
Do we need a break?
Hearing you.
Okay.
It was good hearing you, Jill.
Thank you for calling in. We're going to take a little break, and we'll be back shortly with Jim Robenalt.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Jill Wine-Banks, not Edwin Eisendrath. He'll be back soon, but I'm here today, and I'm here right now with James Robenalt, who is a friend, who is much more than that. He is an amazing character. He is a business litigation attorney at Thompson Hine in Cleveland. He's a prolific author of books and opinion pieces. He writes for Vanity Fair and elsewhere. We met through his work on ethics with John Dean, and he's been a guest on my show on YouTube, Just the Facts, and he's endlessly fascinating. And today, he has a bunch of new articles out that I want to talk to him about. And the first one is about Richard Nixon. And I am so surprised that I am thinking about Richard Nixon as much as I am, but he's back in the news. J.D. Vance did it. Actually, it was really the Nixon Foundation first started this, and then J.D. Vance picked up on it, saying that if Nixon were around today, it would barely be a 12-hour story. And it's just because the deep state took him down, which I guess makes me part of the deep state. But I don't think I am. I think I was dealing with facts and law. But I want to talk to Jim about, not only because he's a historian and what this means in terms of rewriting history and forgetting the facts that brought down Richard Nixon, but because Donald Trump admires Nixon and because Donald Trump didn't learn the lessons from him. And I know that, Jim, you wrote an article comparing the Vietnam War and the bombing, the Christmas bombing, to what's happening in the bombings going on right now. And I wonder if you could share with us your basic premise of that story, and what did Donald Trump fail to learn, aside from the fact that there are consequences for being a criminal in the presidency. He didn't learn that because he's outdoing Richard Nixon by a lot. But let's talk about the war thing, because I am concerned about our being so deep into a war.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be with you, Jill. You have a problem saying what's on your mind, though. I worry that you hold that. No, I wrote about this in my book, January 1973, which is about this 1 month. It was a big turning point in American history. Roe v. Wade was decided that month, Watergate burglars trial. happened. Nixon, second inaugural, LBJ dies. I mean, it was just a big month. But what was important to me was the lead up to January 1973 included what was called the Christmas bombings. And those bombings were the result of an interesting confluence of events. Nixon wins a big re-election.
49 states.
49 states.
Yeah.
It was the third biggest landslide. But his problem was it was without any, any coattails. The Senate increased in number, the number of Democrats. And although the Congress had more Republicans, still not even, they were 41 votes away from a majority. So it was definitely a Democratic Congress that Nixon was going to face in his second term. And that was a problem for him because he was trying to end the Vietnam War. Henry Kissinger was in Paris negotiating with the North Vietnamese. They saw what happened in that election, and they knew that when the Congress came back in January 73, they would cut off funding for the war. So they began to stall. And Nixon was frustrated. There's a really interesting tape, December 14, 1972, with Kissinger, Alexander Haig, and Nixon talking about what are we going to do? You know, the North Vietnamese are stalling. They know that we'll end the war. They won't have to do anything. And they said, interestingly enough, we still have chips to play, and we have to use those chips. And so Nixon's idea was to bomb North Vietnam in such a way that he would force them to come back to the table. Now, that bombing ended up being just an incredible barrage against the North, especially Hanoi, like these Stratofortress B-52s, these huge bombers. The first night of the bombing, which was December 18, they sent like 129 of them in waves. We ended up at the end of that having about 15 of those planes, which were very expensive planes, knocked out and, crews killed. And, a lot of North Vietnamese lost their lives in those bombings. It was like one of the worst and heaviest bombings since World War II. But the point was, he thought that the way to end this war was to bomb them, very similar to Trump thinking he could force the Iranians to the table with increased bombing and so forth. Well, Nixon did get them back to the table, but they were back at the table knowing that there was no political will behind what was going on. Nixon didn't, like Trump, he didn't announce that he was going to do this bombing. He just did it. And when he did it, the Congress was upset. The Senate was upset. This was a real spark, actually, for the Watergate investigation. Because if you remember, Watergate happened like 6 months before the election, and nobody cared. So in that sense, Vance is right. It was a 12-hour story when it first happened. It took 2 years for him to finally leave office, and you were a part of that whole thing. But in any event, you get to the point where in January 1973, when he concludes the bombing, they come back, they have a peace accord in Paris, but it's very weak. They leave North Vietnamese forces in the South in place with some agreement that there would be elections and so forth. And as you know, Vietnam falls 2 years later. So all of that bombing was for nothing, and it really didn't accomplish anything because the North Vietnamese understood what the Iranians now understand, which is the American appetite for continuing that war was done, and it wasn't going to come back. So from their perspective, they could enter into this weak, from the United States perspective, agreement and bide their time. And, of course, Nixon then falls because of Watergate. But in turn, this Christmas bombing so outraged senators like Sam Ervin. Did you ever meet him?
I did.
Yeah. Who ends up running the Watergate committee. Teddy Kennedy, Mike Mansfield, they all were really angry that the president was doing this sort of a campaign without talking to the Congress about it. Very similar to what's happened with Trump, except, today the Congress is doing nothing. Back then, that started the Watergate, investigation. And of course, that's in the beginning of 73. And by the summer of 74, Nixon's resigning. And as I say, you were a big part of that in what you guys did in the Watergate Special Prosecution Force.
Right, but I think the lesson for Trump is that you need to have the people with you, and that your opponent may have a better negotiating position. And I think, as you point out in your article, Richard Nixon was a good poker player, and he knew how to count the chips, so to speak. And yet he messed up in not having the support of the American people. And for sure, the American people are not supporting this war. Very few of them are, and it's part of the reason that his poll numbers are so low. And the Congress doesn't support it, but they have no spine. They won't pass a war resolution saying stop it. And it's their power to do it. They've never declared war, so that's even worse than what happened in Vietnam, because that was like an ongoing war of many years. This is what we're into 6 months now, and there's no approval from Congress for this. That's really bad. Why didn't he learn this? Well, why didn't he learn so many lessons? But why do you think?
As I wrote many times about this actually in the past, Trump, idolized Nixon. He befriended him. He wrote him fan notes. And when he started his campaign, a lot of people didn't notice this. I did. When he first went to Arizona, right after coming down that escalator, one of the first things he said is, "The silent majority is back, baby." And a lot of people probably didn't know what he was talking about, but that's a clear echo to a Nixon's, famous speech about the silent majority. But he also made it his business to attack the press, and this is, again, very Nixonian. There's this very famous tape now, but it was private at the time, that same meeting I was talking about, where Nixon tells Kissinger and Haig, always remember the press is the enemy. The press is the enemy. The establishment is the enemy. The professors are the enemy. Write that on a blackboard 100 times and never forget it. It was very much this, what you want to do is attack the press, attack the establishment, attack professors. This was a part of the Nixon, campaign. And of course, we saw Trump doing that right away in 2016. And he obviously continues it very aggressively now to go after universities, to go after, the press and so forth. And then there's this viciousness about Nixon going after his enemies, the famous enemies list.
Right.
But he didn't talk about it in public, whereas Trump talks about it publicly and publicly goes on his retribution campaigns. This is Nixonian stuff. So what is it that Trump is imitating, really, in essence, about Nixon? And it's outrage politics. That's what fuels the Trump, movement these days, is outrage over immigration, outrage over having a black president, and that outrage politics. That is his superpower, and he gets that directly from Nixon, who was, having outrage against liberals, socialists, student activists, welfare giveaways, busing, the Warren Court. A lot of white racism underneath it all, as there is with the current time. This whole idea of strict constructionist judges on the Supreme Court, which is nothing more than trying to discuss, the Southerners' outrage over Brown versus Board of Education. So Nixon, was very important to Trump, but he didn't study, as he doesn't study very deeply anything. He didn't study, why did Nixon really get kicked out of office? And the answer was because of this Christmas bombing, which was way over the top. The Senate rose up and they started their investigation of Watergate, which, as I said, everybody knew about it when Nixon was reelected, but now, they were coming back to it, and they were going to end up with, people like John Dean showing up and testifying about what was really going on in the White House. So he didn't learn that lesson, that starting a war without having the public support behind it, without consulting Congress, is going to be something that you're leaving your enemy with the ability to enter into a settlement on their terms. And that's where we are with Iran right now. They understand there's no public support for this war. They understand that they can wait us out. and they can wait Trump out. I mean, I think even recently that some top officials said they'd wait until he was out of office. So, this lesson from Watergate, from Nixon's time, of using the military as kind of a political toy, if you will, always backfires. And in this case, it's truly backfiring because the public just is not behind this, and Iran knows it, and that's not going to change. And gas prices are going to continue to go up and have a real impact on our elections.
It's a really bad situation, and I'm sorry that he didn't learn that lesson. I'm sorry he idolized a totally inappropriate president to idolize. But I will say this. I can think of some things that Nixon did that I approve of. He passed Title IX. He opened China. He created the EPA. I'm hard-pressed to think of anything that Donald Trump has done that's good. But I look forward to someone in the among our listeners, calling in with some ideas about anything good or reaching out to me on social media. But let me move to some other topics. There are so many issues to raise with you. You can pick some of the ones you want to talk about. One is, you've been working with John Dean, who was the major witness in the Watergate trial and the Senator Ervin Watergate hearings, who, let me just say, unrelated to anything, is during Watergate, he was like a computer for our office in a day when there were no computers. If we had a question, we'd just go, "Hey, John, what about?" And he would give us the answer. And he had an incredible memory. He was really amazing. And I don't think I ever had a social, personal conversation with him until long after Watergate, many, many, many years later. We were on a panel together, and there was a lunch before the panel. And it's the first time that I ever had a conversation with John, who is a lovely person who I am so glad that I got to know and be friends with. It's quite amazing, the difference between when he was just a witness. But you've been working with him on ethics because as a result of Watergate, there have been a lot of laws passed, many of them being undone by the Supreme Court. Campaign finance reform, for example, gone.
Right.
But now they're trying to take away the independence of the Department of Justice. And you have Todd Blanche saying he is not going to commit to DOJ being independent. He says every attorney general should say that the president can do this. And I want to be clear, if you look at his exact language, maybe it was bad questioning from the interviewer. But in terms of policy, I think that the president can say, I want to spend money on prosecuting immigration offenses. I want to not spend money on monopolies. I don't want to have a civil rights division. Let's just get rid of it. But they can't talk about who should be prosecuted. If you don't want to have antitrust cases, you can't then say, except I want to go against the one person who is donating to Democrats. So let's go after them. Or take away the license of ABC or CBS, Anyway, Department of Justice, what do you think in terms of what he actually said and how important the independence is, given that at the time, my former boss, Henry Peterson, was giving information from the Department of Justice to John Dean and others in the White House because he got bamboozled by the power of the White House. And they were able to develop a cover-up ahead of knowing, because they knew what was going on. So what do you think about what Blanche said? And is it as bad as people are saying?
Yeah, no, I think you're raising a good point. There was, out of Watergate, one of the reforms was there were norms put in place and policies put in place in the Justice Manual for the Department of Justice, which frankly, Jill, are still there.
Yes.
Although they're not being followed. And those norms were to prevent the Department of Justice from working closely with the White House on criminal prosecutions. and they wanted to have some separation. So you can go and read those norms. It essentially is trying to keep this the process of criminal prosecutions out of politics. And so those norms came out of the fact that John Dean, when he broke with the White House, started working with the prosecutors at the time, who were federal prosecutors, with the understanding that this wouldn't go back up to the Attorney General and get to Nixon. Well, sure enough, that's exactly what it did. And as you said, Henry Peterson, also at the Department of Justice, began talking, regularly with Nixon about what Dean was telling them. So they were trying to create some distance there with the Department of Justice. And there's some amazing tapes from that weekend where all this happens. But they're trying to create that distance, and now we don't have that distance. So you see, Comey being prosecuted. All these political prosecutions are now to the fore. And I do believe Blanche is, someone who's been a part of it in the past and will be a part of the future of all this. And it really is in violation of those very norms that still are online if you go to the Justice Department's, regulations. So
absolutely, and he really is violating them. It's just his words in answering the question were very carefully calculated so that they may not be perjury or offensive, but his conduct is offensive. It is in total violation of much needed independence. You don't want the Department of Justice to be a tool of vindictiveness, a tool of political retribution. And that's what it is. But there's another thing that's happening, and you do have evidence of the president saying, go after Comey, go after Letitia James, et cetera. But there's another part where the DOJ is now proposing that no state bar association can investigate a Department of Justice lawyer. That is the way normally, if there's a complaint about lawyer behavior, the bar that you are a member of, that you got your license from. So I'm a member of New York, Washington, and Illinois. I can be disbarred by any of those if I do something in court, or I guess even maybe out of court, that's immoral or illegal. And he's saying, no, only the Department of Justice can evaluate the conduct of Department of Justice lawyers. Is that completely wrong-headed?
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts. It's like saying that the IRS can't, investigate Trump too. I mean, this is all nonsense in terms of having the rule of law. We do know, you and I both know, as lawyers, when we take an oath to support the Constitution. We know that the Department of Justice is supposed to be the lawyers for the government, not the particular occupant of the office. And so, this whole idea that they would be immune from bar associations coming and taking their licenses if they start to violate their oaths that they take, then you've got people who feel that they can do just whatever they want, walk into court, and you now see it. I mean, you see these judges who are threatening sanctions against lawyers for coming in and lying to them about things.
And let me just say that while lawyers who work for the government do have some immunity from prosecution for bringing a unwarranted lawsuit, like the Comey case, they do not have immunity for violating a court order or for lying to the court. Those are things that they can be punished for. And I think I can foresee a lot of DOJ lawyers going to jail or being disbarred for this conduct. So I think it's horrible, and that this rule should not ever be allowed to pass. And we need to weigh in on this and stop it. One last quick question, because we're going to run out of time in like 2 minutes. Okay. The ballroom construction is back on, according to Justice Roberts, who, in a opinion on his own, said that the stay of construction that would have gone into effect on Friday would not go into effect while the Supreme Court considers what seems to me clearly illegal destruction of federal property and spending of our money for construction that was not approved by Congress.
Right.
What do you think of what happened? What does it mean? Is he just a tool of the president now? That is he, Chief Justice Roberts.
Yeah, well, let me just say a couple of things about this whole thing. Number one, there is a fantastic opinion that was written by the Court of Appeals in this case, and it's easy to find online.
Yes.
But it gives the whole history of something, we're all becoming scholars in different areas of the Constitution we never thought we'd be scholars on. There's, a property clause that says Congress is in charge of federal property, and he does not have the right. He didn't have the right to tear down the East Wing, and he doesn't have the right to build something else there. That's for Congress. It's just like the elections clause. That's for Congress. It's not the president. So there's really good long opinion. Now, what happened is that opinion upheld an injunction. And by the way, there's two different things here, Jill. One is the bunker below it,
right,
and the other is the ballroom on top of it. The lawsuit and the injunction is against the ballroom, not against the bunker.
Right.
He keeps trying to put those two things together. By the way, which FDR put that bunker in first in World War II with congressional money and support and so forth. So that's not, this isn't national security. This is just a vanity project.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think what Roberts did is it's very limited. And if you look at it, says it's two sentences. It just says that they're going to, not have the injunction continue while they decide what they're going to do and what they're going to take up and so forth. If they don't take it up, the lower court opinion is going to control, which it does uphold the injunction of building that ballroom.
Of course, the sad thing is that the East Wing was a beautiful part of our historic building, and it's gone. Now, a new Congress, the lawsuits about it will not bring it back, but Congress could by saying, we're going to spend the money instead of on the ballroom, we're going to recreate exactly how the East Wing looked. And I hope that the next administration will do that, and that you will come back and join me on another occasion, because I've loved talking to you, and I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to you. Thank you, Jim Robenalt, for being with me.
Okay, great to talk to you, Jill.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Hi, I'm Jill Wine-Banks, not Edwin Eisendrath, but I'm here today to substitute for him, and I have a fabulous next guest. Her name is Professor Raoul VanLandingham. She's at Southwestern Law School, but she is a national security and military law expert. She was a judge advocate general and served overseas in many, including the war zones. She was in the Air Force, and I have so many questions for her. We've talked before on Just the Facts about the bombings of boats in international waters that are allegedly carrying, without any evidence, carrying drugs and killing survivors of the original attack, which is clearly a war crime. But today I want to talk about some other subjects. I want to talk Raoul. First of all, welcome, Raoul. Hi, are you there?
Jill, I'm here. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to your audience.
Thank you. So I want to talk about, we've talked on Just the Facts about Hexeth's attempt to punish Senator Mark Kelly with a demotion. But now I want to talk about discriminatory promotion actions. It looks really bad. Women officers, female officers, and officers of color are being removed by him from promotion lists. People who have been approved for promotion and are on a list are being yanked off for what looks to me like no apparent or legitimate reason. And the result is that the promotion lists are now white male. They do not reflect the makeup of any of the services. So what do you think legally? Is this something that has some comeuppance that we could get Secretary of Defense, not of War, even though that's what he'd like to be called? And maybe it is Secretary of War. He's taking the war on the Constitution. This seems to me a violation of the 14th Amendment. What do you think?
I mean, it absolutely is, and it's harmful for national security. Look, what we really need, Jill, is Congress to step up and provide specific statutory restrictions and procedural safeguards against another Secretary of Defense like Hegseth doing something similar. As you mentioned, he's actually blocked or delayed at least 40 high-ranking military promotions from. And mind you, Jill, as you know from your previous position working at the Pentagon, the Office of Promotion, especially all officer promotions, but senior officer promotions, follow a process that has been set up by Congress under its Make Rules authority under Article 1 of the Constitution. And it's a process that's supposed to be insulated from political and ideological influence. And therefore, there is a rigorous process of boards and selection procedures based on the transparent criteria and lists that then go from the secretaries of the various branches to the Secretary of Defense. Roughly half of the stalled promotions, either the ones that were completely sidelined or delayed, have been of women, of minorities and women. We're not even getting to the issue of his mass purge of senior officers, including General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff last year at the beginning of the Hegseth reign. So there's significant equal protection concerns here that these removals as well as delays, blocked promotions are based on impermissible factors in race and gender, as well as on ideological factors of, for example, Admiral Barnett. He was on the top of the list for a Navy promotion. He was the first one out of 3 following this rigorous process through the Navy, again, a process that's set up by federal statute. And he was removed, reportedly, from that promotion list because of remarks that he made regarding DEI earlier in his career. And obviously, that's ideological based. That's not merit based. Secretary Hegseth says he's all for merit, but he's not. I mean, these removals are very consistent with the things that he has said regarding both race and gender. And we can get into his task force that he's in a report that he's commissioned, reviewing the standards, the combat standards, in an attempt to, what I believe and what many folks fear, an attempt to roll back to prohibit women from serving in combat roles, as they've successfully been doing for over a decade now. And of course, they were already serving in combat before the restrictions were even lifted in late 2015, because the battlefield is not linear and hasn't been in a very long time. So, Jill, I do think so much of the issues right now, when it comes down to the brass tacks of legality, we know norm-wise that these blocks of promotions of women and minorities and others who have, merely because of what they have said, clashes with Secretary Hegseth's bigoted view of America and of the military, that there's serious constitutional concerns regarding values there. But the actual process, when we get to the actual process, Congress has left some really disconcerting gaps in the statutes regarding giving the president the removal authority, the ability to remove both officers from the list, but as well as giving the president and that's been delegated Secretary of Defense a chance to
he's only allowed to remove,
delay and promote.
The removal is supposed to be because of some moral or intellectual failing that would interfere with their serving as an officer, not because they are female. And in addition to the promotion list, and in addition to firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was the second African-American to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he fired Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the first woman to head the Navy. She was chief of naval ops, and 3-star Navy Vice Admiral Nancy LaCour, who, after getting fired, went into politics and is now the Democratic candidate for South Carolina's 1st Congressional District, which was Nancy Mace's former seat. So, I mean, it's not just denying promotions. It's also firing people who have given their lives and spent their careers serving America. And it's because to me, I think the evidence mounts when you see it's not just one person. It's a system where a majority of the people who have been denied promotion fall into protected categories. And there's another thing that seems to me would violate the 14th Amendment, and that is this testosterone thing. There's a mandatory test of all male soldiers. They have to be tested for testosterone. So first of all, it's discriminatory against women because they aren't being tested. Well,
actually, I read that the edict is gender neutral, that everyone's going to get tested as part of their physical health assessment.
Okay, and then it's voluntary whether you get treatment or not. But there's a challenge to this now in a totally separate case in Reyes versus Talbot. Judge Reyes Judge Reyes in the Talbot case has said, well, how can you argue that you can't have trans soldiers because it would cost too much to give them hormone treatment at the same time you are offering hormone treatment to cisgender males? And that is now being briefed. So I think there's another chance that this could be an equal protection issue if you are denying the right to serve in our military to trans males because you don't want to give them testosterone shots, but you're willing to give other people. And of course, I hate his language. He talks about lethality and war fighting, and we want to improve the war fighting capabilities. Let's face it, drone operators don't need to be physically bulky. I just think...
Right. So, Joe, I like the line that you're drawing, but I do want to drill down a little bit into the actual equal protection claims and talk about testosterone testing policy on one hand and the promotion list, removal list. It's very hypocritical, and I love that Judge Reyes in the Talbot case. Of course, the Talbot case is the case challenging the transgender ban, which is harming our national security. There were 2 individuals that were airlifted that were taken off the Abraham Lincoln, which is the U.S. aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, in the middle of its long support of the Iran war, even though this administration couldn't figure out how to properly logistically supply that aircraft carrier, leading to deteriorating conditions on board. They were so dead set on removing 2 transgender members that the commander wanted to remain because they were doing things like working on the nuclear capability of the nuclear carrier. But instead, they were trying to figure out how to remove transgender service members so they could be summarily removed from the military, despite their obvious contributions and the need that we have for all qualified servicemen, and especially these experienced service members to be serving. But so Judge Reyes in the Talbot case has said, look, you indeed, the actual policy for the transgender ban states that all members of the armed forces, I'm going to read here, must meet high physical and mental standards, quote unquote, without the benefit of routine medical treatment or special provisions. And now with the testosterone policy that Secretary Hegseth was more worried about touting than he was about properly supporting our service members in harm's way, he said, look, we'll be able to give you you can get testosterone treatment if you want it. So, it just really shows the gross hypocrisy, and it really demonstrates in many ways the very skewed priorities of this administration. It started a war of choice, and it placed our service members in harm's way, and there have been 18 service members that have been killed thus far in the Iran war, and many of those service members were in bases in places like Kuwait and Jordan, in which we knew that they would be subject to missile and drone attack, and yet they were left vulnerable by this administration. And that doesn't count the hundreds that have actually been injured, and it doesn't count those who are suffering moral injury, the mental health challenges that we saw reported from not just the U.S. Abraham Lincoln. The U.S. Abraham Lincoln was one carrier. There have been reports of mismanagement, poor logistical supplies. There was since April of our naval vessels out in the Middle East supporting the Iran war. So it goes to show that this administration is not planning properly. They're more worried about culture war issues than about actual war fighting. And if they're going to enter a war that they didn't need to enter, which is the Iran war, then they better be doing it the right way. And all our service members, as you know, Jill, salute smartly and sign up and know they're going to be facing austere conditions, but not austere conditions that we're causing ourselves because of terrible management and the gaslighting by this administration. Every time they say, no, there's nothing to see here, you know that we need to double down and peel back that onion. So the fact that Secretary Hegseth process said that the reports from actual family members of those serving the Abraham Lincoln were, quote unquote, misrepresented, is offensive. The fact that President Bush, who got out of any kind of Vietnam or any kind of military service during Vietnam because of made-up bone spurs that his daddy purchased for him, that diagnosis.
You meant President...
I'm sorry, President Trump.
Yeah.
That President Bone Spurs Trump, that whose daddy bought out his service commitment. Unlike many that Americans that served and passed away in Vietnam. He said that the Abraham Lincoln that hadn't been out long enough.
Right.
I mean, really, is that really how you're going to treat this very, very serious issue? Look, I mean, we can talk all day long about the propriety of going to war against Iran. It was illegal under international law and under U.S. law, but we're in it now. We've been in it for months and months, and this 6 months. It's unbelievable. It's been half a year, and the fact this administration isn't assuring the American people that it's actually taking care of the service members. So thank heavens, U.S. Abraham Lincoln apparently is now about to stream home.
Yeah. The supply is a problem because of the destruction of our supply chain in the area. The base was attacked by the Iranians as would be an appropriate military target. So it's really bad. But this is, I think, everything you're saying is proof to me that there's a double standard, that it violates the 14th Amendment, that we are being ridiculous. I also want to say during the Obama administration, I was on a subcommittee at the Pentagon looking at sexual assault in the military. And I got to work with a lot of generals and other officers, and we talked a lot about trans service. And for everyone that I talked to, they said, nobody cares. They are qualified to do the work that they are doing. They do a good job of it, and honestly, nobody cares. We want them to stay. And it's the same thing you're saying, is the admiral on this ship wanted it. And speaking of ships, of course, we have Donald Trump trying to redesign ships to his aesthetic and going backwards in time to a shape of a ship that is more World War II than it is World War III, and to catapulting. And I've been on an aircraft carrier, and I understand, not serving on it, but just...
Me too. I got to land on one and catapult off one. They're incredible, incredible execution, and that involved tremendous training and the best design that we can give them.
But it's also, if you look at like the bunks, some of them are 4 high. It's not like 1, 2. It's most often 3, and sometimes 4, depending on where in the ship they are. I mean, if you want to sleep on your side, you can't do it because there's just not enough room in between the bunks. But yeah, I mean, as you said, service members are prepared for that. They aren't prepared to be denied clean water to shower and shampoo and soap and food. So that's a real problem. But let's now move to a different war, the war in the First Amendment. So today, we now know that the publisher of Stars and Stripes has been fired. The Inspector General, I don't think it was called Inspector General, but something like that, was fired, or reporters fired, because they reported on, for example, the USS Lincoln. And so the Pentagon doesn't like that the facts are getting out. And for our listeners who may not know what Stars and Stripes is, it's a daily military newspaper that was granted independence editorially, even though part of its funding, at least half of it, comes from the Pentagon or from the defense budget. But it's supposed to be independent, and it's intended to assure that our military service members get the facts, not propaganda. So they aren't supposed to be a spokesman for the administration. They're supposed to deliver facts. And that seems to be getting in the way of the lies that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth want to tell. So they have fired people at Stars and Stripes.
Of course, because Pentagon propaganda is back in vogue, Jill, as you alluded to. And I want to highlight to your listeners that the Stars and Stripes was a newspaper that was started by none other than General John Pershing and during World War I on the battlefield in France, because he wanted to give his service members a chance to be able to write to each other and to speak the thing. In his own words, he said, the paper will be written by the men in the service, should speak the thoughts of the new American Army and the American people from whom the Army has been drawn. It is your paper good luck to it, right? And so, and then later on, Congress actually, appropriate and authorize monies for the Stars and Stripes, which for decades and decades now has served as a source of news for those serving. And granted, with the internet now, many service members have access to other outlets, but some still do not. And so when you're in a forward deployed location, which Wi-Fi spotty, they still print out the Stars and Stripes, which is why Congress recognized that it needed to be independent. And there was actually an ombudsman from position that's created for the Department for Stars and Stripes.
There was an ombudsman. That's who's not there anymore.
She was fired.
Yes.
And why? It's because the Pentagon, as we can see time and time again with the Trump administration, doesn't like facts, doesn't like any kind of critical reporting. Let's look at the overall context here. Secretary Hegseth, there's still litigation ongoing regarding his denial of reporters access to the Pentagon. First, he tried to require them to sign this some ridiculous statement that they would only report what he basically wants them to report. Well, that's not the news. That's your narrative, and that's propaganda. And our founding fathers recognized in the First Amendment that we need an independent press. Why? To hold power to account. This administration doesn't want to be held to account. They know that if they control the narrative, they can win. They want to shape the narrative for particularly not only Americans, but for our service members. And so, Jill, I would link the clamping down, the really Orwellian clamping down the Stars and Stripes and removing its editorial independence, so it becomes just another propaganda source for Hegseth. It has to be connected to Secretary Hegseth's overall politicization of the military.
Absolutely.
This is seen in numerous ways, and never, not simply the egregious blocking and denial of promotions of senior officers, over 40 so far, not just around the over 20 senior officers that were summarily fired, including the purge of the senior military lawyers who were there to represent the rule of law. The reason we have the rule of law, as you know, Jill, is to ensure that power isn't abused. Who represents rule of law in the military? The top lawyers do. Instead, they were replaced by sycophants. And so I would connect this Stars and Stripes, transition into being pure propaganda, to the efforts that Secretary Hegseth is doing to change the actual culture, to make it an ideological and political ally of the far right. I mean, we can see that time and time again on an individual basis. I mean, everything from the transgender ban to blocking promotions of minorities, of women, and of anyone that's actually supported women and minorities, because every woman will tell you, every minority will member, such as my husband, will tell you, they were mentored by white people, because white men make up the majority of the military, and it's the white men that have recognized that if they want their unit to be successful, they need to be able to draw on the experience and skill set of everyone in the unit, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of race. So we've all been mentored by wonderful, wonderful people. And so Secretary Hegseth has even gone after those who have actually done the right thing and been leaders and actually mentored individuals in their units. But he's gone after, as we can see, speech, right? And he's abused the military justice code, abused the administrative system to go after those who dare do things like, oh, guess what? They said something online about, in their personal capacity, about Charlie Kirk. Nothing that would be considered service discrediting, but if they had all aligned themselves with being anti-MAGA, they were administratively suffered adverse actions. However, we have folks out there, there's a particular lieutenant colonel right now who's all over social media saying really atrocious things about his fellow officers. But since he's saying these atrocious service discrediting and actually saying things that are prejudicial to our own discipline, but since he's saying it for the right, he's untouchable. And so it's really a stark and rather Orwellian environment for anyone in the military right now. I've known many military members reach out to me and tell me that they're scrubbing, that they scrub their social media feeds and pray that no one's, goes back to the Wayback Machine and does a deep dive on what they've said, because they didn't say anything they weren't allowed to say, but there's a political witch hunt and ideological witch hunt going on right now.
Going back to Stars and Stripes, I want to say, it's not just that they enjoyed the freedom of the press and independence of the press. It was codified in the Code of Federal Regulations, and now, sort of without following the Administrative Procedures Act, they have pulled those regulations to deny the independence and to change the rules. And so I think there will be consequences. I think there will be a court is going to say you can't do that. You have to have public comment before you can change those rules. And I would hope that people are outraged enough and that the military speaks out on its own behalf saying we want to get facts. We want to get not propaganda, and that they will do that. But there's another First Amendment issue before we only have about 2 minutes left. So I want to ask you about the new Christian curriculum for schools on military bases that is supposed to teach Western civilization, that Islam is inherently violent, and Christian principles in violation, to me, of the First Amendment. How can they get away with that?
Well, they can get away with it until the courts step in and say, look, there's something called the First Amendment, and you're not supposed to be establishing a religion. So really this idea, this moniker of Western civilization, it's a Trojan horse for Christian education, right? Yeah. And Secretary Hegseth has made this very, very clear in many of his comments and his interviews that the administration is trying to align the military's, I mean, not only just the Defense Department schools in which service members' children go to these schools because they don't have access to a U.S. school. Most of these schools are overseas. And not only is the Trump administration trying to align those schools with its political vision and its Christian vision, it really seems like Secretary Hegseth is also trying to do the same thing for internally within the military's education system itself for its service members. We saw the book ban that was challenged We saw books being removed from the Naval Academy. But as you highlighted, yes, this definitely seems to cross lines. Look, curriculum challenges, raise a lot of emotions and get a lot of attention. And so there are bodies out there, impartial bodies that look at curriculum and say, okay, look, is this a product of a scholarly process? There may be two different opinions, many different opinions or alternative viewpoints for a particular issue, such as Christianity. Is Islam a more violent religion than Christianity? Here, the curriculum, the book that they've actually chosen is not a product of such scholarly output, because it fails to mention things like, the Crusades, really? You're going to say that the Crusades really weren't a product of and the Spanish Inquisition doesn't represent Christianity as violent. So, I mean, it's the overall context or the overall presentation of this material in a very skewed way shows that this is part of an agenda, and it absolutely needs to be challenged. And so, again, this administration, that's what it does. It inflicts the damage first, and then the litigation takes a while to try to roll some of this roll some of this back.
Just like the destruction of the East Wing, you pull it down, and it's gone. You can't put it back up. I mean, you could get Congress to get off its duff and maybe give the money to say you can't build a ballroom, but you can duplicate what you destroyed.
But these service members deserve to be back on those promotion lists. But I mean, many of them, I believe, are fearful of filing suit, because then there's retribution. If Secretary Hegseth was willing to try to go after retired Navy Captain Senator Mark Kelly and demote him in retrospect, which the courts have already stopped, but it's still the punishment is the process. Surely these folks are, take a second beat to think about, do I really want to enter into this litigation in which it may lead to other negative collateral consequences? I mean, the chilling effect is real.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Well, thank you very much, Rachel, Professor VanLandingham. This was a great conversation. I look forward to talking to you again. I'm ready for my next guest, the Attorney General of my state, the Attorney General of Illinois, Kwame Raoul.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Welcome back. This is not Edwin Eisendrath. You probably now know it's me, Jill Wine-Banks, and I am so excited. My next guest is the Attorney General of my state, the Attorney General of Illinois, Kwame Raoul, a very successful Attorney General who has done so much in terms of bringing really positive lawsuits I'm very proud to say I worked in that office for Attorney General Neil Hartigan. I was the first Solicitor General of the state and then the Deputy Attorney General, and I loved every minute in that office. So thank you so much, General, for being here. I'm really honored.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored as well to be on your show.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, there's just so much that you've done, and there's a lot of topics I want to talk to you about, but we'll just get started and we'll go as far as we can. There are so many things. You have brought a lawsuit about tariffs, and there's big news about tariffs because the talks with Canada are now officially over, and they are going to impose reciprocal tariffs on us. So talk about your lawsuit about tariffs and how likely do you think victory is? And you're joined by a lot of blue and maybe purple AGs. Any Republican AGs in that plaintiff list?
There are not, unfortunately.
Wow.
Notwithstanding the fact that many of them, if you ask them in private, they would agree with our action because, our action has been not only beneficial to the states who have filed lawsuits, states with Democratic attorney generals, but it's beneficial to those red states as well because,
of course.
this is one of the situations where universal relief is the only type of relief you can get because it's about tariffs on imports, and not just imports to a particular state, but imports to the country at large. And so this is one where their states will benefit from our success, where we've been successful twice already.
Yes.
On our lawsuits with regards to the tariffs, and we again are filing because the administration decision to increase tariffs on more than 80 countries that together account for 99.4%.
Oh, say that again. 99% of our imports come from the countries he's going to. And think about what it does to our prices. Everyone listening to this is going to pay more for everything that we get because he's doing this. And isn't it sad you have brought charges against them on two other ways of bringing about tariffs, and both were successful, and now they are trying a third time. They just won't give up, and it's unpopular. So why do they keep doing it?
It's, this president is enamored with tariffs, and, he's been vocal about it for some time. And he has demonstrated time and time again his disregard for the rule of law, whether it's the Constitution or the Administrative Procedures Act or other congressional acts. He doesn't believe in the design of our country with checks and balances. He believes in sort of a monarchy approach to government, but it just doesn't work that way in this country. And so we have, in the past, gone to the Court of International Trade and all the way up to the Supreme Court, where they have found his tariffs to be unlawful in the past, and we anticipate it will do such again. And it's as much as the president has just become familiar with the word affordability, it is not a hoax, as he says. Americans are struggling, and to do this has less impact on the targets that he supposedly has. It has impact on American consumers and American businesses.
Absolutely. I predict you are going to be successful in this challenge, but I also want to talk about you have a case coming up in the Supreme Court next term, gun control, and that is the Illinois law. And again, there's at least one other state that's joined you in challenging AR-15s and whether you can ban AR-15s, which are, as we all know, the means of mass killings. Almost exclusively the weapon used. So what do you think? I mean, are you going to be successful in that case?
Yeah, I'm not certain, but I stand firmly in our belief that weapons of war shouldn't be in our streets. We've seen so many tragedies, mass shootings, and otherwise, as a result of people having these weapons. I do believe that unfortunately, the sort of doctrine in the Bruin case is one that leans towards popularity instead of whether or not what the founders had in mind.
Yeah. Well, they ignore the founders when they talk
and,
about muskets then. Hardly compare a musket to an AR-15.
Yeah. And what I do want to be clear about this case, the two cases that have been granted cert by the Supreme Court, one has to deal with the state of Connecticut's assault weapon ban, and the other has to deal with the Cook County assault weapons ban. Now, we have defended the statewide assault weapons ban twice successfully before the Seventh Circuit. That case has not, as of yet, been granted cert. So it is actually the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, as well as the Connecticut Attorney General's Office, who will be handling the appeals, the case before the Supreme Court until we get further notice that our cases might be granted cert. But as it is, we've successfully defended the statewide assault weapons ban. And I have been in touch with our state's attorney, and we're trying to be helpful where we can with regards to making sure that we don't allow for these types of weapons to be in our streets.
Well, thank you for that clarification. There are a bunch of other lawsuits that I want to talk about, but which include Illinois suing HUD over the attempt to cut the funding for permanent housing projects to address homelessness, and voter data, 1,000 monitors that may be sent nationwide, not just to Illinois, TPS for Haitian migrants. But before we get to all of those, I want to ask you about, you were so great in bringing a lawsuit about the Equal Rights Amendment. It's something I'm extremely passionate about. I have been fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment since 1976. So we're talking about 50 years that I've been working on that, and I want to live to see that become the law. Is there any hope, maybe not in the Trump administration, but is there any hope going forward? What can people listening do to make it clear that women deserve equal rights and that there's nothing bad about this as the 28th Amendment? What hope can you give me?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we did take our case all the way up to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and we didn't fully prevail there. So the challenge lies, either in Congress or Congress clarifying that the archivist just has a ministerial duty of just recognizing it as our 28th Amendment. My daughter just graduated from law school.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Just sat for the bar a few weeks ago, and hopefully we'll get positive bar results, and I'll be standing with her hopefully when she lifts up her right hand and takes her oath, and within that oath is a responsibility to protect our Constitution. And I've always said that she takes that oath, I wanted it to be a Constitution that fully protects her as well.
Oh, that's so lovely.
And so on her behalf and on the behalf of so many others, I think that we need to continue to press on, whether it's a red state or a blue state, the majority of the voting electorate are women. And I can't understand why there would be anybody any woman who would not be in support of the Equal Rights Amendment. And
or any man. Why isn't every man?
Yeah, there shouldn't be any man. I was going to get to shouldn't be any man either. We are in 2026, and that's why I and the many women within my office, some who have since left, who worked so hard on this, on their behalf and on behalf of so many others, we will continue to press hard to utilize the bully pulpit to try to bring this about.
Well, I think your personal stake in this is your daughter, but I want to thank you because you have been a key proponent of the Equal Rights Amendment. You advocated, obviously, for its official recognition as the 28th Amendment, but you actually, in 2018, as an Illinois state senator, voted for the resolution that made Illinois the 37th state to ratify the ERA. So there was one other after us to make it 38, which is what was needed to make this, as far as I'm concerned, the law of the land and part of the Constitution. And that I do agree with your lawsuit that the archivist should just sign it and make it. Now, of course, the archivist got fired, but she didn't do it anyway. So, and I do remember Donald Trump saying right before the election, I'm going to help women whether they want my help or not. And I actually started saying, well, okay, I do want his help. I want his help. All he has to do is tell Congress to pass a resolution that the only thing standing in the way, which I don't think is valid because it's not an official part of what went to the states, but the language about the timeline, and that all they have to do in Congress is say, well, we lift that. It's now valid. So I'm still, I've given up on Donald Trump doing that, but I am hoping that the next president, Democrat, whoever that is, and in one of the segments today, we talked about possible candidates, and we have a lot of good ones on the Democratic side. Any news about you?
Yes.
Do you want to run for president?
Not me. I think we have enough.
We do have a lot.
Competition will be a healthy thing. I mean, I think we have there plenty of people who could serve and serve well, particularly juxtaposed to what we've experienced over the last.
That's a low bar. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Very low bar.
But we have. It's a healthy thing to have the number of people presenting themselves as potential candidates. I think it'll be winnowed down in short time when that season comes.
Yeah.
But it's healthy to come out of the gate with options.
Yeah, when we talk about a low bar during Watergate, I thought we had seen the lowest we could ever go for a president. I now have a pin that says, I never thought I'd miss Nixon. But boy, compared to Donald Trump, Nixon wasn't, he was a criminal, but a lesser criminal than Donald Trump. So, all right, well, I appreciate all you've done on ERA. I hope you will stick with it. But let's talk about another lawsuit, Illinois suing HUD over the attempt to cap funding for permanent housing projects. What's happening with that? Is that still ongoing, and is there any hope that the funding will come through?
Yes, there is. I mean, on August 7th, a judge, and it is obviously another case where there's a multi-state effort, and we filed in the district in Rhode Island, and the judge granted the multi-state coalition summary judgment, finding that the HUD notice on funding opportunities should be set aside because it's arbitrary and capricious and violative of, as consistent with so many other lawsuits. But we have to think about this for it's just heartlessness. This is the fact that this administration, in this time where people are struggling, one of the things that we understand is that housing stability is the first step towards resolving other challenges for people who are at risk and dealing with various other challenges, and to try to cut off this access is hugely damaging to the stability of communities throughout the country.
Oh, it's such an important issue. And it is, this lawsuit, though, is representative of all the funding that has been cut off after Congress appropriated it. So you have money that's assigned to be used for housing. You have money that's assigned to be used for SNAP benefits. And the president just says, oh, we're not going to spend it. I don't like that program. And that's against the law. But he seems to get away with it because Congress is not doing its job. And I don't know how to make Congress do its job. But that's something that we all ought to be thinking about. As we also say, everybody has to get out there and vote and do everything they can to keep us going. Another thing, go ahead.
I frequently say that I disagree with Chief Justice Roberts on many issues, but he spoke to some students at Georgetown last year, law students, and he said the rule of law was under threat. And in that same speech, he says we really need to enhance our civics communication. And I think that needs to start at the White House and in Congress, such that the president could realize that Congress has the power of the purse. So there's a lot of fundamentals in the Constitution that the president needs to become familiar with. He can use a little schoolhouse rock.
But the Congress is letting him use their power. They have the power of the purse. They have the war power, but they're not using it. And so he is in this awful war, committing war crimes, and not just in Iran, but in the international waters where he's shooting boats that supposedly have drugs on them, but there's not one bit of evidence. Don't you think that if a bomb destroys a ship, that some of the drugs would float, that you would recover them? Or that when you took 2 survivors on board, that you would have brought them back to America and tried them instead of sending them back to their home countries because you don't have any evidence with which to try them? So those are war crimes. The killing of the 2 survivors on the first time they had survivors was clearly a war crime. So that's why they didn't kill the second 2 survivors. They brought them on board, but then they thought, oh, what are we going to do with those 2 people? Oh, well, we can't try them. We don't have any evidence. So I mean, the lack of congressional spine is quite dramatic. So
we had a Senator Warren speak at our Democratic County Chairs brunch earlier this week, and she said there's a medical emergency in the Republican Congress. They seem to be lacking spine.
That's a good line, and unfortunately, it's very true. So we only have a few minutes left. I would love to ask you about whether we should all be worried about 1,000 monitors being dispersed from the Department of Justice. Now, I recognize that Democrats and Republicans have sent monitors, but it's been to make sure that there is disability access, that there's language access, that there's adequate information for people who do not speak English to be able to vote, not to look for fraud. That's never been a job for the monitors. And that's one of the 3 things that the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division said. We're sending 1,000 monitors. And 1,000 is a lot. In the past, even in Biden's time, you had 60 or 80 jurisdictions that had monitors. That's not 1,000 monitors. So what do you think? Are we going to have the National Guard come out and scare people from voting so that only Republicans vote?
Well, first of all, we've already, the state of Illinois, my office has already gone all the way to the Supreme Court, challenging the president's authority to deploy the National Guard, and we were successful with this Supreme Court blocking the deployment of both the Texas and Illinois National Guard. With regards to our elections, again, the Constitution is very clear that the states are given the power to administer the elections within states. And so we're going to continue to protect that power in every way that we must. We utilize that constitutional authority to block the Department of Justice is effort to try to get unredacted voter rolls from our states. It was one area where there were some Republican states that also challenged the effort to get the voter rolls. So I was happy about that. So we stand ready. We have met with our state board of elections and county clerks to remind them what the Constitution says and remind them of their authority. And so we stand ready to protect our elections to make sure that there's a free and fair election.
And I know that you will succeed in that. And I, for one, am very glad that you're our Attorney General. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for spending this time with me. I hope we can do this again sometime.
I look forward to it.
Thank you, Attorney General Kwame Raoul. So that brings us to the end of the show. And I am so glad that you were with me on this. I think that we're out of time, or do we have time for a question? Are there any questioners? Out of time. Oh, we're out of time. So I guess this is goodbye from me for today. And there's still 4 minutes left. I posted online about the CARE event in Skokie. You can go adopt a dog, but you have to be there before 4 o'clock, so hurry on up. I posted a picture of Zephyr. I hope he got a home today, and that every other dog that was there, and cat, and I think there might have been a turtle. Please give them a home. It's so wonderful to have a companion like that, and they need a home, and they're lovely little animals. And the volunteers at CARE in Skokie are fantastic. It's on Main Street. Please go. And if you don't go today, call them for an appointment to see a pet that you might want to bring home with you.